December 26, 1940 for Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force Chef, Versailles. Franchetti room was quiet in a way that only wartime rooms ever were. Maps covered the walls, greased, pinned, stabbed with colored markers that tracked the slow, bloody movement of armies across Europe. Red arrows for German counterattacks, blue lines for Allied advances. Black circles marked cities whose names had become synonymous with sacrifice: Caen, Saint-Lô, Aachen, Bastogne. At the center of the largest map, a red circle still surrounded Bastogne, but for the first time in 7 days, a thin blue line touched it. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at that line. He had not moved for several minutes. The men around the long conference table, Bradley, Montgomery's liaison officers, senior staff, Corps commanders waited. They had been waiting for days. Now the waiting was over. A young aide stepped forward, his voice steady but tight with relief. "Sir, Third Army has made contact with the 101st Airborne. Bastogne is relieved." No cheers erupted. No one slapped the table. No one smiled. They had all learned, by December of 1944, that war never allowed celebrations to last long. Eisenhower closed his eyes briefly. Then he exhaled. The Bastogne gamble for a week. Bastogne had been a name whispered in hallways and spoken with dread in situation rooms. The German Ardennes offensive, what history would later call the Battle of the Bulge, had struck with ferocity and surprise. Snow-choked forests swallowed American divisions whole. Roads jammed with retreating units, refugees, and burning vehicles. Communications collapsed. Weather grounded Allied air power. And at the center of it all sat Bastogne. 7 roads converged there. Lose Bastogne, and the Germans could roll armor west toward the Meuse, hold it. And the enemy timetable collapsed. The 101st Airborne Division paratroopers, not infantry, had been rushed into the town with barely enough ammunition, almost no winter gear, and no heavy artillery. They were surrounded within 48 hours. German envoys had arrived under a white flag. They demanded surrender. General Anthony McAuliffe's response, nuts, had already begun its journey into legend. But legends didn't stop tanks. Legends didn't warm frozen feet or heal frostbitten hands. Legends didn't stop men from bleeding out in foxholes. At 20 below zero. Every day the 101st held was a miracle. Every night Eisenhower went to bed, knowing the miracle might end by morning. Patton's promised turning point had come earlier, on December 19th, in a meeting just as tense as this one. German breakthroughs dominated the map. Eisenhower had turned to the men he trusted most. "What can you do?" he asked General George S. Patton. Patton hadn't hesitated. Double quotes, "Sir, if you give me the order, I can have 3 divisions attacking north within 48 hours. The room had gone silent then too. Patton's Third Army was driving east, pressing toward Germany, to pivot an entire army 90 degrees, in winter, under enemy pressure. Was madness. Eisenhower had stared at Patton, searching for exaggeration. Patton hadn't blinked. "Make it 48 hours, Eisenhower said. Patton had nodded. "Yes, sir." Now, 7 days later, that promise had been kept. Relief at Bastogne. First tank from the 4th Armored Division broke through the German lines south of Bastogne just after noon on December 26th. A Sherman tank, mud-caked and scarred, pushed through a roadblock of smashed trees and abandoned enemy vehicles. Infantry followed, weapons raised, unsure if it was a trap. Then they saw them. Paratroopers in filthy, frost-stiffened uniforms emerged from the tree line. Their faces were hollow, eyes sunken, beards thick with ice. Some smiled, some laughed, some just stared. One airborne sergeant slapped the side of the Sherman and shouted, "About damn time!" Inside Bastogne, wounded men wept openly. Medics worked faster, knowing evacuation was finally possible. Ammunition trucks rolled in. Hot food followed. The siege was broken. The 101st had survived. Eisenhower speaks back in Versailles. Eisenhower finally turned from the map. He faced the men around the table. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "Bastogne is relieved." He paused, letting the words settle. "I want every one of you to understand something." His voice hardened not with anger, but with gravity. This was not luck. This was not chance. This was not the weather turning in our favor. He gestured toward the map, his finger tracing Patton's advance. This was leadership, planning, discipline, and the willingness of American soldiers to march, fight, and die in conditions no man should ever be asked to endure. No one spoke. Eisenhower looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. The 101st did not just hold a town, he continued. They held the line of the entire Western Front. They bought us time. They broke the enemy's momentum. Then he added something few expected, and they were saved because another army moved heaven and earth to reach them. Words about Patton. Simeon finally asked the question hanging in the air. Sir, General Patton? Eisenhower's expression changed, not softening, but becoming more complex. George Patton is many things, he said carefully. Difficult, arrogant, impatient, a few nods around the table. But when this army needed speed, he gave us speed. When we needed audacity, he gave us audacity. And when the situation demanded absolute confidence, he did not hesitate. Eisenhower paused again. I want it on record that the relief of Bastogne will stand as one of the finest operational maneuvers of this war. He straightened, and I want every commander here to remember something else. He pointed back to Bastogne. Patton didn't save the 101st. Alone the cost paid. Eisenhower began naming units: the 4th Armored, the 26th Infantry, the engineers who cleared roads under fire, the drivers who froze at their wheels, the medics who worked until their hands bled. His voice grew heavier. And the men who didn't make it. The room felt smaller now. Those soldiers did not ask whether the mission was impossible. They asked only where to go. He let the silence stretch. That, Eisenhower said, is why we will win this war. A private moment after the meeting broke, most of the generals filtered out quietly. Bradley lingered. You all right, Ike? He asked. Eisenhower nodded, but his eyes remained on the map. I keep thinking about those boys in Bastogne, he said. No winter coats, surrounded, told to surrender. Bradley smiled faintly. They told the Germans nuts. Eisenhower allowed himself a brief smile. Yes, he said. They did. Then his face grew serious again. Promise me something, Omar. What's that? When this war is over, we remember Bastogne for more than the victory. Bradley nodded. We will. Patton receives the word. Patton was standing beside a muddy road somewhere in Luxembourg when the message reached him. Third Army headquarters crackled with radio traffic. Snow fell thick and wet. An aide handed him the dispatch. Patton read it once. Then again. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Well? An officer asked. Patton looked toward the north, toward Bastogne. We did our duty, he said. Nothing more. Later that night, Patton would kneel alone in his trailer and offer a quiet prayer, not of triumph, but of gratitude. For the men who marched. For the men who fought. For the men who would never leave the Ardennes. Legacy years later, when historians would write about the Battle of the Bulge, they would talk about strategy and weather and logistics. They would analyze Patton's maneuver. They would immortalize the word nuts. But those who were there remembered something else. They remembered the silence in Eisenhower's headquarters when the news arrived. They remembered his words, and they remembered that, in the coldest winter of the war, surrounded and outnumbered, American soldiers had held not because they thought they would be saved, but because they refused to yield. And when they were finally saved, the supreme commander of the Allied forces made it clear. Victory was not owned by one man. It belonged to all who endured.